thousands of hunters spend hundreds of dollars upgrading to a .44 Magnum because they've been told the same thing for decades. Bigger bullet, bigger recoil, bigger power, end of discussion. Walk into almost any gun store, ask which cartridge hits harder, and chances are you'll hear exactly the same answer. If you want the ultimate revolver round for deer hunting, buy the .44 Magnum. But what if everything you've heard is only half true? What if one of the biggest assumptions in hunting has been misleading shooters for years? Today, we're putting that belief on trial, not with internet opinions, not with ballistic charts, and definitely not with guesswork. We're testing it the only way that really matters, with real firearms, real ammunition, and real results. You'll see water jugs explode. You'll watch bullets expand and deform. We'll measure actual velocity with a chronograph instead of trusting the numbers printed on the box. Then we'll recover every bullet we can and compare exactly what happened after impact. But here's what makes this test different. We're not comparing just two revolvers, and we're not comparing just two rifles. We're testing both platforms side by side, using nearly identical bullet designs to eliminate as many variables as possible. That means we'll discover not only which cartridge performs better, but also how barrel length completely changes the outcome in ways most hunters never expect. I thought I already knew how this experiment would end. Looking at the numbers on paper, the winner seemed obvious. But after recovering the bullets and comparing the penetration, one result completely changed my expectations. By the end of this video, you may never look at the .357 Magnum and the .44 Magnum the same way again. And if you're planning to head into deer season with one of these cartridges, today's test might completely change which one you'll trust when that once-in-a-lifetime shot finally presents itself. Before we fire a single shot, let's make one thing absolutely clear. This isn't a competition designed to make one cartridge look better than the other. The goal today is to remove as many variables as possible so the results reflect what these cartridges are actually capable of. Too many online comparisons change multiple factors at once: different bullet designs, different bullet weights, different barrel lengths, and then declare a winner. That's not how you get meaningful data. For this test, we're using 4 firearms that represent 2 of the most common hunting platforms. On the back, 357 Magnum side, we have a trusted 7-shot Taurus revolver and a Ruger 77 bolt-action rifle. On the .44 Magnum side, we're using a Taurus Raging Hunter revolver alongside a Ruger 77-44 bolt-action rifle. These aren't safe queens, they're rifles and revolvers that have spent real time in the field, and a couple of them have already accounted for white-tailed deer. That makes today's comparison far more relevant than simply shooting targets at the range. Both rifles are equipped with quality optics to maximize shot placement, while the revolvers are set up the way many hunters would actually carry them into the woods. The bolt-action rifles are also fitted with suppressors, not to change the outcome of the test, but to make the shooting experience more comfortable and to better observe every impact without excessive muzzle blast. Suppressors don't magically increase stopping power, but they do help eliminate distractions so we can focus on the performance of the ammunition itself. Now let's talk about the ammunition, because this is where the test becomes much more interesting. Rather than comparing completely different hunting loads, we've selected cartridges that use nearly identical bullet construction. The .357 Magnum is loaded with a 180-grain hunting bullet, while the .44 Magnum uses a bullet built with the same purpose and expansion characteristics. Keeping the bullet design as similar as possible allows us to isolate what really changes the outcome: cartridge size, velocity, barrel length, and energy, rather than simply giving one caliber an unfair advantage through superior ammunition. That detail matters more than most shooters realize. A bullet's construction often has a greater influence on terminal performance than caliber alone. A fast-expanding bullet can stop much sooner than a slower bullet that holds together, and a heavier projectile isn't automatically the deepest penetrator if it sheds energy too quickly after impact. By controlling the bullet design, we're giving both cartridges the fairest possible opportunity to prove themselves. Over the next several minutes, we'll measure their real muzzle velocities, send each one through the exact same water jug test, recover every projectile we can find, and compare not only how far they penetrate, but how they expand, deform, and retain their weight. Only then can we answer the question that has divided hunters for decades. Does the legendary .44 Magnum truly outperform the .357 Magnum in every meaningful category, or is the answer far more complicated than most of us have been led to believe? Before we see what happens after impact, we need to know exactly what leaves the muzzle. Factory ammunition boxes only tell part of the story because every firearm is different. Barrel length, chamber dimensions, and even powder burn efficiency can change velocity dramatically. That's why we're putting every load over the chronograph instead of relying on advertised numbers. The results are immediately revealing. As expected, both bolt-action rifles produce significantly higher velocities than their revolver counterparts. A longer barrel gives the expanding gases more time to accelerate the bullet before it exits the muzzle, allowing more of the powder to burn efficiently. In a shorter revolver barrel, some of that energy is still being released after the bullet has already left the gun, reducing overall velocity. At first glance, the .44 Magnum appears to dominate the charts. It delivers more velocity and substantially more muzzle energy than the .357 Magnum, seemingly confirming everything we've been told. But energy is only part of the equation. Momentum also plays a critical role in how a bullet behaves after impact. A projectile with tremendous energy can also expand violently, dumping that energy quickly instead of driving deeper into the target. So, on paper, the .44 Magnum looks like the clear favorite. More speed, more energy, more momentum. Case closed, or is it? Because numbers measured at the muzzle don't always predict what happens inside a target. In the next test, we're about to find out whether ballistic theory survives contact with reality, or whether one of hunting's oldest assumptions is about to fall apart. Now it's time for the first real test, and we're starting with the firearm that many people assume has the least chance of winning. 357 Magnum Revolver has earned a legendary reputation for accuracy and versatility, but when it comes to raw power, it's often overshadowed by its bigger .44 Magnum brother. Based on everything we've measured so far, you would probably expect this round to penetrate fewer water jugs and stop well before the larger cartridge. Honestly, that was my prediction too. The revolver is loaded with a 180-grain hunting bullet, aimed at the center of the first water jug and fired under identical conditions to ensure every cartridge faces the exact same challenge. The instant the trigger breaks, the first jug erupts in a violent burst of water, sending a wave through the entire line. At first glance, the impact looks impressive, but appearances can be deceiving. What really matters isn't how dramatic the splash is, it's how much energy the bullet keeps after that initial impact. As we inspect the row of jugs, the 357 continues driving farther than many shooters would expect. Eventually, we recover the expanded bullet and get our first look at how it performed. The mushroom is clean and symmetrical, showing reliable expansion without the petals folding completely backward or breaking apart. More importantly, the bullet has retained enough integrity to keep moving after expanding. Exactly what hunters hope to see from a controlled expansion design. This first result already challenges a common misconception. A smaller caliber doesn't automatically mean shallow penetration. When a bullet expands in a controlled manner, instead of violently shedding energy, it can continue pushing forward remarkably well. For white-tailed deer and similarly sized game, that balance between expansion and penetration is often far more important than simply producing the biggest muzzle energy number. And if the 357 Magnum is already delivering this kind of performance from a revolver, the rifle version could become much more interesting than anyone expects. Now we move to the .357 Magnum bolt-action rifle, and this is where the experiment becomes truly interesting. We already know from the chronograph that the longer barrel produces a significant increase in velocity. On paper, that should give this cartridge a clear advantage. Faster bullet, more energy, deeper penetration, at least. That's what conventional wisdom would suggest. But ballistic performance isn't always that simple, and this shot is about to prove why. The rifle sends the 180-grain bullet into the first water jug with noticeably more force than the revolver. The impact is far more violent, creating a larger burst of water and a much stronger hydraulic pressure wave through the entire row. That temporary cavity expands almost instantly, transferring energy into the surrounding water before collapsing just as quickly. It's an impressive display of power, but a dramatic splash doesn't necessarily mean the bullet will travel farther. As we inspect the recovered projectile, the reason becomes much clearer. The higher impact velocity has caused the bullet to expand more aggressively than it did from the revolver. The mushroom is noticeably wider, increasing frontal surface area and creating greater resistance as it moves through the target. Fortunately, the bullet remains intact, showing excellent weight retention with no signs of fragmentation. Had the bullet broken apart at this speed, penetration could have been reduced even further. This is one of the most misunderstood principles in terminal ballistics. More velocity creates more hydraulic pressure and often produces a larger temporary cavity, but it can also force a hunting bullet to expand earlier in the penetration cycle. When expansion increases faster than momentum can carry the bullet forward, additional speed doesn't always translate into additional depth. That raises an even bigger question. If the faster .357 Magnum rifle doesn't dramatically outperform its revolver counterpart, what happens when we step up to the far more powerful .44 Magnum? That's where this comparison takes an unexpected turn. Now, it's time for the cartridge that built its reputation on raw power. For decades, the .44 Magnum has been considered the gold standard for handgun hunting, and after seeing the chronograph numbers, expectations couldn't be much higher. More energy, a larger bullet, and heavier recoil should translate into overwhelming terminal performance. If any handgun is going to dominate this test, this should be it. The moment the trigger breaks, the difference is immediately noticeable. The recoil is sharper and more authoritative, driving the muzzle upward with significantly more force than the .357 Magnum. That extra power is exciting on the range, but it also raises an important question that rarely gets discussed. How much does recoil affect the shot that really matters? On a bench, recoil is manageable. Deep in thick timber, with your heart pounding and a mature buck moving through the brush, maintaining control for a precise shot becomes far more challenging. The 44 slams into the first water jug with tremendous force, creating an explosive hydraulic effect that looks every bit as dramatic as its reputation suggests. As we recover the bullet, expansion is excellent, producing a wide, uniform mushroom while retaining enough weight to continue driving forward. It's exactly the kind of terminal performance hunters expect from a premium controlled expansion hunting load. But here's where practical hunting experience becomes more important than raw ballistic numbers. A cartridge is only as effective as the hunter behind it. The increased recoil of the .44 Magnum can slow follow-up shots, increase shooter fatigue during long practice sessions, and make consistent shot placement more difficult for many people. In dense woods, where opportunities often appear and disappear in seconds, confidence and accuracy may matter more than carrying the most powerful revolver available. The .44 Magnum unquestionably delivers impressive performance, but the real question isn't whether it hits harder, it's whether that extra power provides enough real-world advantage to outweigh the compromises. And with the .44 Magnum rifle still waiting, this comparison is far from over. We've reached the moment this entire experiment has been building toward. On paper, this should be the undisputed champion. .44 Magnum fired from a bolt-action rifle combines the largest bullet in today's test with the highest muzzle energy and a substantial increase in velocity over the revolver. If raw power decides everything, this should dominate. It should penetrate the deepest, hit the hardest, and leave no room for debate. But physics has a habit of embarrassing assumptions, and today's final shot will determine whether the numbers tell the whole story. The rifle settles onto the target, the crosshairs lock in, and the trigger breaks cleanly. Instantly, the first water jug erupts in a massive explosion, sending water high into the air and driving a powerful shockwave through the entire line. Visually, it's the most dramatic impact of the day. If you judged performance by the size of the splash alone, the contest would already be over. But once we begin examining the results, the story becomes much more complicated. The recovered bullet displays textbook expansion, opening into a broad, uniform mushroom while maintaining excellent structural integrity. It performs exactly as a premium hunting bullet is designed to perform. However, that larger frontal diameter also creates significantly more resistance as the bullet pushes through the target. Instead of converting every bit of additional velocity into deeper penetration, much of that extra energy is spent creating a wider wound channel and transferring force rapidly into the surrounding medium. That's the critical lesson many ballistic charts fail to explain. More energy doesn't always produce more penetration. Sometimes it produces more expansion. Sometimes it creates a larger temporary cavity, and sometimes it simply dumps more energy earlier in the penetration cycle. The .44 Magnum rifle is undeniably powerful, but after seeing all four tests side by side, one thing has become clear. The biggest cartridge doesn't always produce the biggest advantage. Now it's time to compare every result together and find out which combination truly delivered the best balance of penetration, expansion, and real-world hunting performance. After hours of testing, measuring, and recovering every projectile we could find, it's finally time to put all four combinations side by side. This is the moment where assumptions meet evidence. Throughout this experiment, we measured far more than just which cartridge made the biggest splash. We tracked velocity at the muzzle, observed penetration through identical water jug setups, examined bullet expansion, evaluated recovered bullet weight, and most importantly, considered what each result actually means for hunters in the real world. Looking at the comparison table, the first trend is exactly what we expected. The two rifles produced noticeably higher velocities than their revolver counterparts thanks to their longer barrels. More complete powder burn translated into higher muzzle energy and increased momentum. But as we've seen throughout today's test, those impressive numbers didn't automatically guarantee dramatically deeper penetration. The .357 Magnum Revolver delivered the biggest surprise of the day. Despite having the lowest muzzle velocity in the lineup, it demonstrated excellent penetration with controlled expansion. The recovered bullet retained its structure remarkably well, proving that a properly designed hunting bullet doesn't need extreme velocity to perform effectively for white-tailed deer inside normal handgun hunting distances. Its balance of penetration and expansion was far more impressive than many shooters would expect. The .357 Magnum rifle increased velocity significantly and produced even more consistent expansion. However, the additional speed also caused the bullet to open more aggressively, increasing drag as it traveled through the target. Instead of dramatically increasing penetration, much of that extra energy was invested in creating a larger wound channel. It was a perfect example of why velocity alone never tells the entire story. The .44 Magnum Revolver delivered exactly what its reputation promises: tremendous impact energy, wide expansion, and excellent bullet integrity. It unquestionably hit with more authority than the .357 revolver. However, that advantage came with substantially greater recoil, making rapid follow-up shots and consistent shot placement more demanding. For experienced handgun hunters, that's a manageable trade-off. For many others, it's an important factor that can't be ignored. Finally, the .44 Magnum rifle stood at the top of the performance charts in terms of raw energy. It produced outstanding expansion and retained its bullet weight exceptionally well. Yet its advantage in penetration was far smaller than the numbers on paper had suggested. Rather than completely dominating the test, it demonstrated something much more valuable: that premium bullet construction and controlled expansion often matter just as much as caliber itself. So what does all of this mean in practical hunting terms? If your priority is low recoil, affordable practice, and excellent deer performance, the .357 Magnum remains an outstanding choice. If you're pursuing larger game or simply want additional impact energy with greater confidence on tougher animals, the .44 Magnum still earns its legendary reputation. But perhaps the biggest lesson from today's experiment is this: choosing the right hunting cartridge isn't about chasing the biggest numbers. It's about finding the combination of accuracy, control, penetration, and bullet performance that gives you complete confidence when the one shot that matters finally arrives. After all the testing, the biggest question isn't which cartridge is more powerful. We already know the answer to that. The real question is which one I would actually carry into the field when the shot truly matters. Because hunting isn't won on paper, it's won by making the right decision for the situation you're in. If my season was focused almost entirely on white-tailed deer, especially inside 100 yards, I'd have no hesitation carrying the .357 Magnum, whether it's in the revolver or the bolt-action rifle. Today's test proved that it delivers more than enough penetration with controlled expansion. Add in its lighter recoil, lower ammunition cost, and the ability to practice more often, and it's a cartridge that's surprisingly difficult to overlook. Now, if the hunt involved larger, tougher animals like black bears or mature wild hogs, my confidence begins to shift toward the .44 Magnum. The larger bullet diameter, greater impact energy, and wider permanent wound channel provide an additional margin of performance when penetrating heavier muscle and bone. It's not that the .357 can't do the job under the right conditions, but the .44 offers a greater level of assurance when the game becomes more demanding. The environment also changes my decision. In thick woods or dense brush, where shots are fast and usually well under 75 yards, a lightweight revolver is hard to beat. However, recoil matters just as much as power. .357 Magnum allows quicker follow-up shots and makes accurate shot placement easier under pressure, while the .44 Magnum asks more from the shooter every time the trigger is pulled. Confidence and control can often outweigh raw energy in these closer range encounters. For longer opportunities, especially around 100 to 150 yards, the bolt-action rifles become the obvious choice. The added barrel length extracts more performance from both cartridges, improves accuracy, and gives the hunter greater confidence when placing a precise shot. Between the two rifles, the .44 Magnum carries more authority on larger game, while the .357 Magnum remains an exceptionally capable deer rifle with noticeably softer recoil and lower operating costs. Outside of hunting, the decision changes again. As a practical truck gun or a lightweight companion for backpacking, the .357 Magnum stands out because of its versatility, manageable recoil, and the wide availability of ammunition. The .44 Magnum certainly delivers unmatched stopping power, but that extra power comes with increased weight, louder recoil, and more expensive ammunition factors that matter during long days in the field. After everything we've seen today, my conclusion is surprisingly simple. I wouldn't choose a cartridge based on internet myths or muzzle energy charts alone. I'd choose the one that best matches the game I'm pursuing, the terrain I'm hunting, and the confidence I have behind the trigger. Because when that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity finally appears, the best hunting cartridge isn't necessarily the most powerful one. It's the one you can place exactly where it needs to go every single time. When we started this experiment, I thought the conclusion was already written. Like many hunters, I assumed the .44 Magnum would dominate every category simply because it carried more energy, fired a larger bullet, and had earned its legendary reputation over decades. On paper, that seemed impossible to argue against, but today's results reminded us of something every experienced hunter eventually learns. Ballistics are far more complicated than numbers printed on the side of an ammunition box. What impressed me the most wasn't how powerful the .44 Magnum proved to be. We already expected that. The real surprise was how incredibly well the .357 Magnum held its own. Again and again it demonstrated that controlled expansion, solid bullet construction, and consistent shot placement can narrow the gap far more than most shooters imagine. It didn't rewrite the laws of physics, but it certainly challenged one of the oldest assumptions in the hunting community. The biggest lesson from today's comparison is that there is no perfect cartridge. Every choice comes with trade-offs. More energy often means more recoil. More velocity can create more expansion, but not always more penetration. A larger caliber may offer greater confidence on heavier game, while a lighter recoiling cartridge may help a hunter place the most important shot with greater precision. In the end, success in the field is rarely determined by caliber alone. It's determined by preparation, confidence, and the ability to make a clean, ethical shot when the opportunity finally arrives. So now the decision belongs to you. If you had one deer tag, one hunt, one shot, one chance to make it count, which cartridge would you trust? The proven versatility of the .357 Magnum, or the legendary authority of the .44 Magnum? After seeing every test today, I'm not nearly as certain as I was before. The answer isn't as obvious as the myths would have us believe. I'd genuinely like to hear your reasoning, not just which one you'd choose, but why. Is it recoil, confidence, years of hunting experience, bullet performance, or simply trust built over countless seasons? Because one thing is absolutely certain: the debate between the .357 Magnum and the .44 Magnum didn't end with this experiment. If anything, it has only just begun.